George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Cross-dressing in the USA and in the UK, political cross-dressing that is. And that's not for whom the letters are coming in. They're coming in against Rishi Sunak. That's right, the 1922 committee, that oddly named Assemblée of conservative men in grey suits, are getting busy counting the mail all over again. A challenge for Rishi Sunak is incoming, and the war drags on, but increasingly to the disadvantage of NATO. They have to piss or get off the pot, as we say in Glasgow, because if NATO doesn't enter this war soon, it's going to be all over by Christmas. And if they enter, it's all over for all of us long before the festivities. All that and a look at the workings of the political systems on both sides of the Atlantic. How the right became the left and the left became the right, and actually none of it means anything anymore. It's going to be a bumpy night, so fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I told my editor I was going to be concentrating on the issue of cross-dressing, but he misunderstood, so he's dug out all kinds of pictures of EddieIzzard and the rest. That's not the cross-dressing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the truly extraordinary thing, and bear in mind that I have been in politics for more than 50 years. More than 50 years. And I have never known or even imagined in my wildest dreams that this current situation on the political spectrum would come to pass. Let's take the war. The only people opposing the war in Ukraine and the endless shoveling of tens of billions of dollars into the most corrupt regime in Europe are the people on the right of the American political spectrum, at least as far as the official political class is concerned. Dr. Cornel West, running for the Green Party, is of course totally outstanding on this subject, and rightly identifying the existence of NATO as a major part of our problems and promising to wind it up if he, in the unlikely event, becomes president. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., ditto. But I'm talking about in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and of course in the inner councils of the White House, the cross-dressing is complete. Once upon a time, in my lifetime, in the Vietnam War, for example, it was the left that were demanding an end to the war, and the right that were demanding more and more and more dead American soldiers and endless amounts of money for a losing cause, reinforcing failure, throwing good money after bad. That situation has now completely reversed. The left in American politics, as defined as the mainstream Democratic Party, which is what the media refer to when they talk about the left and the progressive side of politics, is 100% behind Joe Biden and Antony Blinken and Volodymyr Zelensky and the war machine, the military-industrial complex, the big arms companies, and I presume the top military brass, although when they retire, like Colonel Douglas MacGregor, you oftentimes get a glimpse at what the real opinions of the top military brass are. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these other women and men in the so-called squad are 100% behind the war. And worse, actually, even than that, they are 100% behind more and more and more censorship. I refer to my earlier point. In my lifetime, it was the left that demanded an end to censorship, the right that demanded ever more censorship. Why are you putting Galloway on the television, they would say? Not 20 years ago in the context of the Iraq War. Why are you giving Galloway all this airtime to pollute the airwaves with his anti-war messages, and also eloquently too, if I say so myself? The opposite has now happened. In Britain, the people fighting hardest against the overweening censorship of free debate, of raising questions, of testing theories, of doubting the experts, are people on the right. And the people on the so-called left are cheering as the European Union, for example, passes a law which is now in place. Who knows? I might get cut off mid-sentence here. The spreading of disinformation as defined by them and nobody else, with no recourse to any court in any land, will lead to the social media companies being told to remove, to block, and to censor the points of view that the European Union decides are disinformation. Now, in the beginning, this was only about the election cycle virus. In the beginning, this was only about people questioning the veracity of the claims made by Big Pharma, very profitable claims made by Big Pharma. But be sure it has now moved on to other political issues. Now it's the war. Tomorrow it will be something else. It will be immigration. It will be asylum seekers. It will be open borders. Anything will be defined by the European Union as disinformation, and the social media companies, however courageous or not courageous they might be, Elon Musk may be, Mark Zuckerberg, not at all courageous, but a gutless coward, and Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Britain, in charge of censorship. He was a Liberal Democrat when he was in Parliament. They'll decide what can go out about a war. So there's every possibility, at least within the European Union, that anything I say, never mind anyone else, my good friend Afsan Ratansi and Going Underground are just in the memory hole now for the European public. They can only be watched and heard in the free world. Isn't that funny? We used to say we were the free world. Now we're the least free part of the world. And the day is coming, might come tonight, where anyone questioning the narrative of the prevailing orthodoxy on anything, but I'm most concerned about the war, will be ruthlessly censored. The social media companies will be fined millions of dollars for allowing access to their platforms to people with inconvenient views and arguments. That's bad, of course. It's bad in principle. It's the very antithesis of what being a Democrat is supposed to be. It's the very opposite of what the so-called left used to stand for. But it's much worse than that. It's not because it will put me out of a job. That's a mere bagatelle. It's because you, the public, will not be able to hear the Scott Ritters, the Colonel Douglas McGregors, the Mark Berletic. You'll not be able to hear the other point of view, and therefore, how can you possibly know that your government, on your dime, in your name, is doing the right thing, is going in the right direction, if you haven't heard the alternative point of view? It is the so-called left in the United States that is fully behind the CIA, fully behind the FBI, fully behind the military-industrial complex, the censorship industry, and fully behind the war. And such opposition as there is at the top level in US politics is coming from the right. That's what I meant by political cross-dressing. And I'll be exploring it with the wonderful Neil Oliver, the Coast Guy, on Twitter, and a commentator on GB News, a historian of note, and a masterful storyteller. Let's hear what he has to say about these things tonight. But let me move on to the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak, or for American viewers, Rashid Sunak, go figure, as Joe Biden said. Mind you, Joe Biden this week said on television, live, when thanking the man who just introduced him, Pete Buttigieg, he introduced him, or referred to him rather, look away children, as Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg is his Secretary of State for Transportation. The man was standing right next to him and didn't know where to look. But the Rashid Sunak story has suddenly come back on to the agenda. It was imagined that Sunak was going to manage the decline of the Conservative Party, mitigate the scale of its upcoming defeat in the British general election next year, before Christmas of next year. But the polls, the bottom has fallen out of the Conservative Party. And one of the reasons for that, or one of the things that could have been done differently, which certainly would have mitigated it, would be for the leader of the Conservative Party to start acting like a conservative, to start acting in ways that some of his predecessors, and I was there when they did it, would not have flinched for a second in doing. How can it be that in a Britain ruled by the Conservative Party for 13 years, that I was able to read just yesterday in Britain a notice referring to, again, children look away, people with vaginas. People with vaginas. They cannot bring themselves to say the word woman. They refuse to define what a woman is. They are enthralled by exactly the same mess of pottage that is the gender-bending, gender-fixated, sexually obsessed centre ground in British politics that I call Blairism. They are in love with Tony Blair. They follow every word and anticipate every thought that emanates from Tony Blair's mind, which is social liberalism to its extreme, to the nth degree, combined with a laissez-faire attitude to economic and social problems in Britain, that is the least conservative thing I have ever seen. We still get lunatics on social media talking about how this Tory government is the most right-wing Tory government that has ever been. You people never lived through Margaret Thatcher, for God's sake. This is not a conservative government. This is a liberal government with a small L. It's a liberal government in all but name. And it's the liberalism that's killing them after all. If you really want a liberal government, why would you want a Conservative Party at the head of it? If you really want thousands of people to cross the English Channel in rubber dinghies, almost all of them men, almost all of them men of fighting age, who've lost their passports but managed to hold on to their mobile phones, to then be billeted in some of England's best 3- and 4-star hotels, why would you want a Conservative government to preside over it? If you really want all of these liberal nostrums to be the prevailing orthodoxy in this country, why not give another liberal, Sir Keir Starmer, a chance? These are the issues that are going to do for Rishi Sunak. Because knowing the Conservative Party as I do, once upon a time the most efficient political organization on the planet, which ruthlessly dispatched its leaders, even its most revered leaders, with a knife in the back, Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, knifed in the back, both of them, then if you're going to knife Margaret Thatcher, you're not going to balk at Rashid Sunak. This man is a cipher. He is a nothing. He stands for nothing. And very shortly also, he has no bottom. He has no presence. He has no gravitas. He can't speak. He doesn't look right. There's something of the spiv about him. And it's not a very pleasant look. As I've said to you before, most conservatives in this country think we should still be ruling India, not that an Indian should be ruling us. Moreover, an Indian on the make, an Indian who married a billionaire-ess, and whose father-in-law, by the way, is still doing a roaring trade in both Russia and China, when our companies are being stopped from doing any business with Russia and much business with China. Huawei out the door. Rishi Sunak's father-in-law's business doing a roaring trade in China. This man is so flimsy, so insubstantial. It is a wonder that it has taken so long. But it's now happening. There's something for viewers overseas called the 1922 Committee. Crazy name, crazy people. These are the men, overwhelmingly men, in grey suits. They are the men that go to one Tory leader after another once they have outlived their usefulness. And their usefulness is only measured, only, by whether or not the members of Parliament can hold their seats at the next election, or whether they're going to have to go out and try and ply their trade elsewhere in an inhospitable market. The 1922 Committee governs the business of the Conservative Party in Parliament in Britain. And if enough members of Parliament submit motions of no confidence, then automatically a new election contest is triggered. Now, I know there have been an awful lot of them, and it's quite hard to keep up. Somebody called Grant Shapps is now in charge of the war effort. Well, you know him as Grant Shapps. I know him as a Mr. Green, because our new war leader actually has multiple aliases and invents customer comments effusively praising the various businesses, failed businesses, that he was hitherto involved in, and he invented every single one of those quotes. So Mr. Green, or Mr. Shapps, is now in charge of the Light Brigade to which I shall return in a minute. But the Conservative Party will not sit by for very much longer and wait for Rashid Sunak to ride them into the guns. These are not the gallant 600. There's nothing gallant about the Conservative Party in Parliament. They are concerned only with their own individual prospects at the upcoming general election. So my view is that Rashid Sunak is toast. And these letters, I'm told, are now coming in thick and fast. So expect a challenge to the leadership of the Conservative Party before the autumn leaves have stopped falling. Lastly, on the war, because I'm about to speak to Brian Berletic, who knows more about war than almost anybody anywhere in the media market. The charge of the gallant 600 into the guns at the Battle of Balaclava took place, in case you don't know it, in a place called Crimea. It was called the Crimean War. It was a precursor to the First World War, and the levels of slaughter and carnage that were experienced in that war had never hitherto been seen in the history of warfare in the world. We may now be about to have another Crimean War, because the increasingly exposed and corrupted regime in Kiev have really only got one last shot. Their offensive, their counter-offensive, has failed and failed and failed again. The game-changing equipment, materiel, weapons that were supposed to arrive and turn the tide have all failed miserably. Do you remember the Abrams tank, the Chieftain tanks, the F-16s, the depleted uranium bombs that the departing Ben Wallace bestowed on the people of Ukraine? None of these weapons has made a blind bit of difference. There's only one thing left, and that's to provoke a nuclear war. And that nuclear war will be provoked in any one of many circumstances, but the most significant of those circumstances is if NATO makes a serious effort on the ground to recapture Crimea. If they show the slightest sign of being in a position to conquer the Crimean Peninsula, then the World War is on. Because for the Russians, that is an existential matter. And a tactical nuclear weapon, or two, or three, will be fired at the Ukrainian forces if they so much as seem to be ready to encroach on the Russian territory of Crimea. A new Crimean War, anyone? Well, let's see what Brian Berletic thinks. He's coming up right after this. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now here's our poll for tonight. Will there be a nuclear war between the US and Russia in the next year? Most of you appear oddly sanguine about that. You can vote yes or no on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X or on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching us on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to my channel. It won't cost you a cent. Just press subscribe. Press the bell for notifications and the thumbs up if you are enjoying the show. So far, 27% of people say there will be. 26, 29, and 26. So a mean of around 27 or 28% of you think there will be. But getting on for 3/4 of you think there will be no nuclear war in the next year at least. 18,344 people have voted so far. Get your vote in before the end of the show. Brian Berletic is a former soldier, a man of immense strategic and political intelligence. His new atlas is indispensable in the world today, as all the maps, the political maps at least, are being redrawn. He's a regular guest on the show and a very popular one at that. Brian Berletic, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I posed the question on the poll because Tucker Carlson was very clear that there will be a nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States. I myself am equally persuaded that there will be. But as you may have just heard, only about 1/4 of the public think that that is a serious proposition. You're a man who knows this game. What's your view?
Maybe a lot of people are voting because they don't even want to imagine that such a thing is possible. And I think in Moscow and hopefully in Washington and in London, there are at least some people who feel similar to that. They do not want to see a nuclear exchange. They know it'll be catastrophic for everyone on all sides. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal on Earth. They're constantly upgrading it. They have brand new intercontinental ballistic missiles that just came into service. They're preparing this because they do understand the gravity of the threat. This is a proxy war being waged against them by the US, by the rest of NATO, and they understand the real danger that it poses to them. It is an existential threat to Russia. So they're taking it very seriously. Also, we see a history in the West of them being unable to accept defeat, being unable to reverse gear, but also now they're unable to succeed on the battlefield, proxy and directly. So it's a very, very dangerous situation. And I believe that there is a possibility. However small, there is a possibility. It only has to happen one time. There only has to be one miscalculation for this to go catastrophic.
Well, their multi-warhead Sarmad missile is now on duty, on active duty. This is a rocket that, if fired from Kaliningrad, will destroy London, Birmingham, Manchester, in Glasgow, at least in an instant, and will be here in around 7 minutes from Kaliningrad. And I'm sure that Americans and others, French people, German people, have an idea what their main targets would be at the hands of the same rocket. The Russians are not deploying this for a laugh. They have not put this on active duty for a laugh because, Brian, you know this very well, when you're fighting a war thousands of miles away in somebody else's country, that's not an existential matter for you. But if you are fighting a war literally on your own doorstep and increasingly inside your own country, that is an existential matter. And therefore, There are no holds barred. There wouldn't be for any nuclear-armed country threatened with destruction, dismemberment, and ruin, would there?
Absolutely. And I think the problem that we see is policymakers in Washington are so used to waging war so far abroad. And even this proxy war they're waging against Russia and Ukraine, this for the West is not existential. This might be existential for the existence of NATO, but this is an organization that does not need to exist. It has not needed to exist for decades. It's questionable whether it ever needed to exist. And so the stakes are completely different for the West as they are for Russia. And the West has a very bad habit, and they've done this all throughout this confrontation with Russia before this current conflict began, and all throughout this current conflict, underestimating Russian resolve. They seem surprised that Russia went into Ukraine in the first place. They seem surprised that the defenses in the south, in Zaporozhye, are so formidable that Russian people are standing and fighting and defeating these NATO-trained in arms Ukrainian forces that were supposed to roll right over Russian defenses. So this is a big problem when you have policymakers who have constantly underestimated Russia, who cannot seem to get into the head of policymakers in Moscow and understand how serious it is to them from their point of view. This is the making of an error in judgment, a miscalculation that could lead to something catastrophic.
And many people on the left and the right, inside the military, in diplomatic circles and out of it, have been warning about this for a very long time. These miscalculations surely began with the Gorbachev, Bush Sr. Agreements and the assurances that were given to Gorbachev that if the then Soviet Union did not oppose the coming down of the wall, the reunification of Germany, the withdrawal of Russian forces from Germany, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. That was the word that Secretary James Baker actually said. We know that because he wrote it in his own memoirs. They also completely failed to hear Putin's Munich speech in 2008, when again he spelt out all of the consequences that might flow from the expansion of NATO and its inexorable drive to the east. Are we led by fools or knaves, Brian?
Sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference, and that's absolutely true. That is a very good point. A lot of people should keep that in mind, that NATO has constantly expanded east, even after the Cold War was over, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This entire conflict in Ukraine is about NATO expansion eastward. And it goes beyond just mere expansion. It's the way that it is expanding. The West poses as if these nations chose to join NATO, when in reality, these were regime change operations, the installation of a client regime that would then join NATO, even if it contradicted that nation's best interests, which, say, in Ukraine's case is absolutely true. Georgia, the government was overthrown in 2003. Then the US and NATO armed it. And then Georgian forces attacked Russian forces in 2008. Imagine that happening again in Ukraine, but on a much larger scale. This is the threat that Russia was reacting to. The fact that people in Washington seem surprised that Russia took it so seriously, that is very scary. And we have to wonder, and I think we should be worried that they're going to make the same type of miscalculation, go through the same mental process when it comes to nuclear weapons. We even see in the media, the Western media, many themes surrounding the idea that Russia, their red lines mean nothing. We don't have to worry about them. We can cross them. Russia won't do anything. But again, it only takes pushing that button one time, and everything will be over.
Let me ask you a question, Brian, that tantalizes me. I alluded to it in my introduction. When we hear from people like you, military men who've been on the inside, Larry Johnson, Scott Ritter, Colonel McGregor, and so on, we hear a very different perspective to that which the politicians in charge of the military, at least nominally, are the breeze that they are constantly shooting. Is there a tension between the people who actually have to do the fighting and dying until it becomes nuclear, in which case we all die and nobody fights? I'm just wondering if you fellows are somehow an aberration, or whether there exists inside the military, intelligence, security apparatus, serious misgivings about the road that the politicians are taking us down.
I think, fortunately, that there are people on the inside who understand all of this. After all, a lot of my analysis surrounding the conflict in Ukraine, you and I have talked before the offensive was ever launched. We talked about how it would be a failure. How did we know this? How did I know this? I was reading through the Western media, and in between the propaganda, you do see the actual facts that all added up to this upcoming offensive being a catastrophic failure. And so that means that there are people there collecting actual facts, and they are in place. The problem is that a lot of people who do understand how this all really works, they're not allowed to put that together into a report that says, no, the offensive is impossible. This whole project is impossible. You should stop now before you squander any more life or move us closer to nuclear annihilation. They're not allowed to do that for political reasons. And that is the problem. There is a political agenda disconnected from reality. And I think the further forward that it goes, the further away from reality it gets. And that is so dangerous, and especially because of this point you're bringing up tonight about the potential for nuclear conflict.
Now, the truth is, the commander-in-chief, not just of American forces, but effectively all of America's allies, is a few sandwiches short of a picnic. He is unlikely to thrill the troops, and increasingly as he goes around the US, he's greeted by a chorus of abuse, some of it very vulgar indeed. But the situation is still that if he gave the order, it would be carried out. Anybody feeling safer going to bed tonight that if Joe Biden orders events that will ineluctably lead to a nuclear war, that everyone will carry out their duty, salute and say, yes, sir?
Well, some people might suspect that U.S. President Joe Biden is not actually really in charge of anything. He's not even apparently in charge of his own faculties. But then does that make it any better? Because then we don't actually know who really is in charge or who really would make that call. And it is a frightening prospect if the decision was made. I believe that people further down the chain of command would carry out their orders. That is how everything is set up to operate. They don't really have the ability to question it or to protest it. And so what we have to really hope, we ourselves have to make noise about this, but what we have to hope is that there are people on the inside talking about this and trying to steer things away before it even comes to that decision. The conflict in Ukraine has been a disaster for the West. I see some signs that seem to indicate that they are contemplating perhaps an exit ramp other than nuclear annihilation. So I mean, we have to hope, because otherwise there really is nothing that we can do if they press forward, and that is their ultimate determination is nuclear annihilation.
Brian, it's the middle of the night in Thailand. You have a family that you adore, and you've stayed up till this hour to further educate the mother of all talk shows and its international audience. I'm much obliged to you, sir. Thank you and good night. Brian Berletic, as always. Will there be a nuclear war between the US and Russia in the next year? Yes or no? I don't know how many people have voted now. It's not been updated. I'm hoping it gets over 20,000, but then that's me being petty. On YouTube, Two's Time says, no, he made the point. Well done, Brian, staying up this late in Thailand. Let's take a quick break and then we'll update you on that poll. Be right back. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
$19,129 people have so far voted, and still, although the number of yes votes is edging up, but still 70% plus think there will be no nuclear war between the US and Russia in the next year. Have your say on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Please follow me on Telegram, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. The MOATS of Deutsch returned to all bells and whistles this afternoon. It was a terrific show. I didn't get the nuance of the winophile. I'm presuming that even in German, that's somebody that really loves wine that they interviewed today. But once I've got my translation up and running, I'm sure I'll get to it. But the winter season of our German show, which starts just before ours, is now back up and running, MOATS of Deutsch. So if you understand German or wait for the translation, you'll find it a very useful insight into Europe's most important country and how political and economic developments are going there. I was recently in Germany with Gayatri, but we made a flying visit to Lisbon this weekend for this. Take a look. Here we are at the weekend festival, Avante, in Lisbon, Portugal. Less than 50 years ago, Portugal was a fascist country, a fascist dictatorship, a byword for torture and disappearance, extrajudicial murder, and the political exile of the left and progressive forces in the Iberian Peninsula. Less than 50 years ago, an alliance of the masses in Portugal, the radicalized armed forces, and of course the hammer of the anti-colonial movement in Portugal's African colonies managed at last to smash the fascist dictatorship. The leading role played by the Portuguese Communist Party is still revered, respected at least in the country today. That's why behind me there are 100,000 people jumping in a big square to popular music, not necessarily of my particular taste. It is extraordinary. Portugal is the last country in the Western world where the hammer and sickle is everywhere, in every town, city and village, whether rich or poor. The role of the PCP in the overthrow of fascism has stood them in good stead, including electorally all these decades. Portugal's not a socialist country, of course, but it is a democratic one, and it tries to keep its nose out of other people's affairs, unlike some countries on the European continent I could mention. There are provisions here for children, for mothers, for disabled people. There are people of all ages, all races, all colours, creeds and backgrounds. It is genuinely a fantastic event. It's the first weekend of September every single year. Put it in your diary. Visit Portugal, visit the Avante Festival. Of course, it helps that the weather is always nice. Actually, the attendance at the festa over the weekend was actually 250,000 people in a country with a population of 10.5 million. It was just outside Lisbon in Setúbal, and it was quite extraordinary. Now, I'm not saying everyone that went to it was politically right on. Some were just there for the beer and just there for the music. But the ambience was like nothing that you'll find anywhere in Western Europe. There was the huge Portuguese flag alongside the huge hammer and sickle flag of the PCP. Now, this is possible only because, I hope they don't mind me saying so, of the heroism and the leading role that the PCP played in the overthrow of the fascist dictatorship in Portugal. The sacrifice, the heroism of that party has certainly repaid itself many times over in the respect, at least, of the Portuguese people for that party. Great festa. We've moved on, Gayatri and me, but we will never forget it. Let's take the first calls of the evening. Pat in Wigan on Rashid Sunak. Go ahead, Pat.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
I'd just like to say we've got two choices. We've got Sunak and we've got Labour. Now, I'm not for any of them at all. They've never done nothing for us. I'm 67.
Neither am I. Neither am I.
I'm 67 now, and I feel we need some change. And all these smaller parties, UKIP, Reform, I think they should all get together and create one big party that can overthrow these two, kick them out of the way. And
well, I get that, Pat, and yeah, go on, finish your point.
Well, when you think about it, if everybody's voting for these smaller parties, we're all divided. We don't need to be divided. We could all come together and we could all get one big party and fight them. I mean, bite the bullet and fight them, because I think we need to do.
Well, I understand your feelings on it. I share them, but we have to face facts. everybody isn't voting for these smaller parties. If you'll allow me to blow my own trumpet, the only person that a significant number of people vote for in by-elections outside of the mainstream parties is me. The last time out, 22% of the poll. These other parties are lucky to get 2% of the poll. I got 22% in a crowded field. I have twice defeated the Labour Party as a smaller party in the elections, in Bethnal Green and Bow in 2005 and in Bradford West in 2012. And a couple of years ago, I got that 22% in the by-election in Batley and Spen. But the Reform Party and these other smaller parties that you refer to, they don't even get 2%. In fact, some of the ones you mentioned, I'll not embarrass them, get 1%. Never mind 2%. Never mind 22%. Never mind a winning number. And if you put them all together, you still wouldn't have a row of beans. So there's no point in pretending to ourselves that it is otherwise. These two parties, which are really basically the same party, they're all Blairites now, they win because people vote for them. And the smaller parties don't win because people don't vote for them. In my own case, even not in sufficient numbers. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that how could you find agreement on anything by merging these widely disparate parties together? We agree, maybe, on some important things, maybe the most important, urgent things. But we so wildly disagree on so many other things. The Reform Party, for example, is gung-ho for the war in Ukraine. Richard Tice and his paramour are zealous evangelical advocates for the war in Ukraine and the hatred of all things Russian and Chinese. How could I ally with them or they ally with me? It wouldn't take us 5 minutes before we were at each other's throat. Lawrence Fox's party has a better take on many of these things, but he is one of the leader of one of the smaller parties. So I don't think parties can merge. But what I floated, with no takers, I should say, was a Liberty Alliance, which would have maybe a 3-part program, the most important of which would be freedom of speech and defending democracy in Britain from all of the many attacks, onslaughts that it faces. I set up a Twitter account for it. I called on the leaders of these smaller parties not to merge into one party, but to be part of an alliance, a Liberty Alliance. I think that would have been, when at the time that I floated it, well over a year ago now, possibly in a position to intervene in the British general election with some prospect of making an impact. But time has passed, it's probably running out. At this point in time, I won't be voting for anybody. I could never vote for the Labour or Conservative parties, even less the Liberal Democrats. And I think the biggest party in Britain at the next general election will once again be those who don't vote for anybody at all. Pat, thanks for that great call. David is in Swindon on the same subject, Sunak. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely same subject. Rishi Sunak, the guy just is a complete turn-off for me. I'll just give you a few examples, and just bear with me a minute. The first one that comes to mind is about a year ago, he said that everybody should be doing maths till they're 18. Do you remember that? Everybody's going to do maths till they're 18 at school. No subsidies. I looked online to set up a committee to look at it. You know, the unions are saying we haven't got enough maths teachers anyway. So that's just one thing. Free nursery places. Again, about 9 months ago, all that fuss about free nursery places, nothing's happening. And by the way, his wife was one of the people who would benefit from that. When he was Chancellor, he said they're going to get...
He
forgot.
He inadvertently broke parliamentary rules by failing to notice that the policy he announced would greatly financially benefit his own wife. These things can happen, David.
Yeah, but going on the story, on the 21st of June, he was at the World Bank Forum on Ukraine with Ursula von der Leyen and all those people. He actually pledged to Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine that Britain would back. I think it was about $1.8 billion that he would back the World Bank to give Ukraine rebuild. Oh, no. This comes to the main point. So he's prepared to put $1.8 billion into building Ukraine. That's a waste of money. But I looked at Grenfell Tower, still standing, hasn't been rebuilt. 6 years on, there's still three families that haven't been rehomed from Grenfell Towers. The cost they've put forward plans. Some architects said we can actually refurbish it. Some can rebuild it. But you're talking probably about 100 million in total. I mean, that's it. And we're 6 years on from Grenfell Tower.
I wish he'd rebuild. I wish he'd rebuild Britain before rebuilding another country thousands of miles away. Apart from anything else, any money that he puts into Ukraine is very likely to fall into Russian hands, and before not long. David, thanks very much for that call. Grenfell Tower, the tower block that was engulfed in an inferno, killing scores of people. Perhaps we'll never know exactly how many people were consumed in that blaze. Still unrebuilt, still families homeless as a result of that fire. And of course, the cause of the fire and the cause of the inability of the fire brigade to put it out, well, the policies, not just of this Conservative government, but the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown government before it. An email from Ben. Our email address, by the way, is onair@moats.tv. Dear George, have you seen the video of the protesters in Niger storming the French military base? Power to the people. Kind regards, Ben. I did, Ben. I didn't hear what happened in the end. I saw them attempting to storm. Did they succeed in storming the French military base? Did the French soldiers fire back? And what was the result? If anyone knows, let me know. I was busy over the weekend. Great guest coming up, a legend, Erobos, in New York on nuclear war. Erobos, welcome back to the show. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much, Mr. Galloway. Salubrious night and a warm greetings and hospital welcome from West Harlem, New York, to you, your family, the fans, your loved ones, and of course, the beautiful Gayatri and your family. What you mentioned, I missed the monologue. I had a late start to today. I missed most of your monologue. However, what you said with Brian Berletic there, Brian in Bangkok, about people not believing. This is a conversation I had with Garland Nixon when we did Rage Against the War Machine, which was, the People's Party with the Libertarians and our allies like this. And this is the key, it struck a chord with me when you said that, because this is the key why the turnout for these events are not like, the Central Park event or like the event you did 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago now, which would be, the anti-Iraq invasion. In New York in the 80s, they had about 1 million people in Central Park. But the generation of people then seemed to remember the threat, the actual threat. And I think, you know, the whole thing, even though it was performative, of diving under the school table, the school desk, you know, as children, it sort of stood in the mind. It inculcated in the mind. And would also go into why there's so much resistance from the liberals and from the liberal sympathizers. These people, you know, a head full of guano, and, you know, they're very parochial and petty because they genuinely do not believe that a nuclear war could happen. It's beyond the scope of their imagination. They can't even fathom what a nuclear war is or what it would do, even though the Oppenheimer film, where, you know, it's all over the place, it's all over the world. To them, that's just entertainment. And that's a core problem. That's a fundamental issue. You know, like I said, it moved something in me when you brought that up with Brian Berletic, because it puts the hammer right on the nail, the precise point of why we get so much resistance. You know, we did the Humanity for Peace rally with the LaRouche Schiller Institute. Well, it was their thing, and Scott Ritter and everybody came out right across the street, Dam Hammerstag Plaza across the street from the UN here in New York. And it was the same thing, right? It was a small group of people, and then, you know, you had the PSYOP agents coming out and trying to disrupt the thing. But these people fundamentally, and at the risk of being redundant because it is important, they at their core, they think that they're going to continue on with their careers, with their life, and they fundamentally don't believe that a nuclear war is going to happen. And, you know, I'm in the boat with you. I do not want a nuclear war for them to be convinced by this action. You know, there's a meme, and I'm just going to finish with this. There's a meme where there are two what do they call them, nondescript players. I'm not a gamer, but there's a term for like nondescript people in the game, and two of them are there, and there's a mushroom cloud behind them. And they said, well, and one says, well, at least I'm fully vaxxed. And the other one says, well, at least Trump is not in power, so it's not that bad. You know, and this is the mentality of these people, you know. So I just wanted to share that. I wanted to thank you again for having a political home for people to go to, a political home for people to go to and express not just their vote, but their desire to change the country by fighting the establishment. Without a political home, it's just talk, analysis paralysis, retweets, subs, subscriptions, and all that foolishness. Everybody's going to be dead with a nuclear war. So thank you again, and thank the Workers' Party of Great Britain, and forward and onward we shall go. Thank you very much.
God bless you, Erebos, the legend in New York. Just remember that sentence he just said. Everybody's going to be dead if there is a nuclear war. Just think about that. Coming up in the second hour, Sunak has produced a disproportionate number of men of the world. I'm one. Neil Oliver is another. And he's your guest right after this short break. Stay tuned. Do you know how many people watch MSNBC? If this was a normal business, it would be out of business long ago. Do you know how many people watch CNN? We are in danger of fixating too much on the liberal hegemony of media outlets with infinitesimally small viewership. This show that you are watching has 10 times the viewership, 10 times the viewership of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV with its budget of billions. So, you know, let's not lose hope. Let's be our own media. You're right, not everybody watches me, watches those other people that you watch. Well, it's your job, and it's everybody else's job that's watching this and agrees with me this evening. It's your job to tell as many other people as you possibly can what we are all about, how to find us, encourage them, and check up afterwards whether they took your advice, and if they didn't, encourage them all over again. Have you any idea how we would multiply if everybody watching this did that? The best part of 2 million people will watch this program over the next 7 days. If those nearly 2 million spoke to one other person, we'd be 3 million if their advice was taken. And so on and exponentially on, it is possible to go. It's in our hands, let's do it. I can't do much more than what I'm doing. I need you, the audience, to spread the word.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I need you, as they said on the Blues Brothers, to spread the word to the audience. One man with a very substantial audience of his own, some of which overlaps, but not all. And perhaps at the end of this interview, both of our audiences will have increased as a result. Neil Oliver is a historian. He is a man with a great feel for the natural world, for the beauty, particularly of this island, but he has increasingly become embroiled in politics. How can one not, when so much of what was once treasurable in this country, at least, and in others, has been taken from us, has either withered on the vine or has been torn from our grasp? We both remember a better Britain, and both of us hope that it's not too late to save the Britain that we loved. He is Neil Oliver. Neil, thanks very much for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Let me start with that point. Britain is facing enormous challenges. Leave the existential ones of world war aside for the moment. There's the scourge of separatism that seeks to break up a small island into several new states. There's the collapse in the credibility of our institutions and in our government. I mean, I think if you took a microphone out onto the street and asked people how many of them respected the politicians that are in power now, or for that matter, the politicians that are likely to replace them, the number of affirmatives would be vanishingly few. And I'm not in Britain at the moment, you are, but viewed from where I am, Britain's in serious trouble. Do you think so?
I do, George, and thanks for making time for me this evening. You and I have spoken together, privately, and we have found common ground. And some of it is the belief that the Britain in which we both grew up has gone. I have been a lifelong lover of the British Isles, and I suppose to some extent for me it began with a love of landscape and a love of the history and the archaeology. If I'm anything, I'm an archaeologist, and I grew up with that. I was imbued with that from my parents, and more recently I've written about the British Isles, and I have written about and of my love of the British Isles, but in many ways in recent years I've been writing a eulogy for a place that I think no longer exists, which is a great sadness to me. But I think in writing that eulogy and in speaking about the extent to which I think that what I have loved and do love has been eroded, I think there's still time. And I think that the vast majority of the people to whom I speak and who come up to me in the street every day and say hello and shake hands and want to make the point that we're all on the same road. I suppose, although I'm despondent at times, I have great faith that the people are still absolutely committed to the Britain of my memory, and I think, people like yourself, people like me, and millions besides, we hold it close, we hold it dear, and we will. There's every possibility that we can resuscitate that which has been and should go on.
Well, not with the current crew. Rishi Sunak is not the man to save Britain. God knows how the Conservative Party ended up with him. It's a bit like the Joe Biden situation in the US. You scratch your head and say, how can that be the best that the British political class can produce? Now, I was postulating earlier that he may not be that much longer for 10 Downing Street, though heaven knows where they're going to find someone to replace him that will make things any better. We do have a parlous political class, don't we?
Well, yes. I mean, it doesn't. No one needs to hear me say this about you. You have been in the political arena for as long as I can remember. Although I know that you haven't been an active politician for the last number of years. But in my sense, you are a political man. And I've said it before, and I'll happily say it again, that to me, you are the last Labour politician standing, whether or not you have a seat. That's irrelevant. To me, you embody what I have always understood to be the Labour Party. Now, that said, you being the last Labour man standing, the rest of the political sphere has been hollowed out. My eulogy to Britain is in part because of my awareness that there's nobody left that speaks for the left, for the right, for the centre. That has all gone, and that space, in ways that I struggle to understand, far less to articulate, has been co-opted by a zombie, parasitic ideology that I'm almost loath to use the word ideology, because an ideology would suggest that it stands for something. It stands for nothing. It's there to facilitate, the asset stripping of this great country. It's there to facilitate the asset stripping of the West. It's there to impoverish people rather than raise them up. It's there to make the case for those who seek to profit from our demise, and Rishi Sunak, you mentioned Grant Shapps as Defence Secretary. It's an absolute nonsense. I don't think anybody in Britain believes that Rishi Sunak runs Britain. Nobody believes that, not even his colleagues. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, I think people looking on at him can see what it is that he's about, which is seeking division, sowing racial hatred, sowing division. The people of this country are crying out for something to believe in. Or I might put that better. The people of this country do believe in something. They believe in what they have always believed in, which is family, which is tradition, which is the culture of these islands. They want to see those protected and celebrated, but instead what they're confronted with are people who stand for nothing. And it does beg the question, who will come forward and stand for something? And because I ask myself that question all the time, I tend to believe that the political environment, the political arena is so corrupted, so toxic, that I don't think the solutions that we need will come from the world of politics. Now, having said that, I don't know from which world the necessary solutions will come. But all that I draw on all of the time is the faith that I have based on the continual contact that I have with the people of this country day by day, week by week, and month by month, which reassures me that the people of this country still believe in what they've always believed in: family, education for their children, safety for their offspring. Those things remain constant, and I remain optimistic that is what will carry us through where we are now.
The organizing. There is the real danger that people go quietly into the good night. And there's a big conspiracy against the emergence of any possibility of another way. The prevailing orthodoxy is a very powerful dictatorship. As Dr. Johnson said long ago, if people are told that there is no alternative, and if even social media is increasingly closed down as a method by which people can learn of alternative ways forward, it's a rather bleak prospect. I don't think it's not in my nature to be a pessimist, but neither is a foolish optimism doing anyone any service.
George, I don't think I would be, giving anything away by saying that 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, you and I might not have, seen ourselves as sharing the same point of view. I've never considered myself to be a particularly political animal. You have. I have watched you and been aware of you for decades, and for a lot of the time, disagreed with some of what you were saying. But, and this is the important point, through it all, you have adhered to certain fundamental values about family, about faith, about tradition, about the rights of men and women, about equality, about the right to a life, the right to an honourable life. And that has distilled down to the point where I have realised and come to accept that, where I might have not realised it for the longest time, that we are simpatico in a great deal. And I think that right there is the cause for optimism. I think that so much has gone wrong in the bigger picture. We've been fed so much nonsense that nobody believes in, that those of us who continue to adhere to the fundamental values have seen through the mist of it, the fog of it, and have found one another. So that, two men like you and I that might previously have felt quite separated by all sorts of ideology, have realised that in this fog of war, in this nonsense that's all around us, you and I and many people, most people around us, understand that we are united by a common cause. And I'm aware of repeating myself in what I've said over the last 10 minutes or so of this conversation. But it's of fundamental importance, and it is the reason for optimism. All this nonsense that's out there about transgenderism and about climate crisis and all of the wildfires in Greece and the wildfires in Maui and the forever war in Ukraine that we're being fed, that's to distract us. So many people have seen through it or are gradually coming to see through it and realising that what we want is what people all over the world always want, which is peace, which is the peace to get on with our lives, which is the knowledge that we can get along with one another, that we are tolerant without being told to be tolerant, that there's a great cause for optimism about that commonality that we have, and that that you and I talk off camera. We talk privately, and we have come to understand that we are simpatico and that we share a lot of the same opinions, and that is of fundamental importance and is a reason for optimism.
Amen. It would be a good reason to rejoice that we had left the European Union if Britain was not going to go down the road the European Union has embarked on this very week of a dramatic ratcheting up of the tools of censorship in media, the so-called disinformation game. I'd be happy that while we don't have to go down that road because we voted to leave the European Union, except our government is even more keen on censorship than the European Union. It may very well be that this conversation we are having now will no longer be possible, at least on any kind of platform that can reach significant numbers of people, and quite soon. That's one of the, if not the, most important challenges, isn't it? Because the reason it's the First Amendment in the United States is because it's the most important one. If you don't have free speech, you don't have any freedoms at all.
Everybody knows this. This is one of those fundamentals. When anyone talks about freedom of speech, it runs through everyone. It's like lightning, through a lightning conductor. We're all energized by the threat to the freedom to talk, and any thinking person understands, without having to be told, that the threat of not being able to share ideas, to debate, to argue, to find common ground. Any threat to that fundamental function of the human animal, we all fear it, and we will all rebel against it. I think it's a strange irony that the internet was conjured into being in the 1960s, and it has enabled millions, billions of people to talk to one another. That was a collateral benefit. That wasn't why the internet was built. The internet was built so that the US military could maintain connections between its computers. The fact that it enabled millions of people around the world to find one another and to share ideas was an unexpected collateral benefit for all of us. And it's because of that that it's now being censored and moves are being made to shut it down. Because the greatest threat to tyranny, to authoritarianism, to totalitarianism, is the ability for all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life to come together and have conversations the like of which you and I are having now. And my optimism about the power of the human spirit is such that even if censorship means that you and I can't communicate by these means by which we're communicating now, we would find another way. I've been saying privately and publicly for a while now that I think the future is analog. We've all become very dependent on this wonderful ability that we have to communicate via, digital technology. But people will always find ways to converse and to communicate. And if the powers that be, if the totalitarians out there go so far as to shut us down and to seek to make these kinds of conversations impossible, then the likes of you and me and millions of others like us will find another way. We will not be silenced. These conversations that have been, conjured into being and inspired, they're going on all around the place all of the time, and they will keep going because we, as a species, as the human race, we understand that it's by remaining in contact with one another that we will prevail and that we will find the solutions to the problems that we have.
Amen. Well, while people still can, they should follow the Coast Guy on Twitter and watch Neil Oliver's show on GB News. It's been a pleasure to speak to you on screen rather than our behind the screen discussions over months and years. Thank you, Neil Oliver, very much.
Bless you, George Galloway.
Will there be, thank you, will there be a nuclear war between the US and Russia in the next year? Well, you can vote. 28,000, I've won my bet with my editor, 571 people have voted. But still, over 70% of you, but not much over 70% of you think that there will not be. But you've got 10, 15 minutes maybe to get your vote in. Let me take a quick break and then it's your calls all the way to the end of the show. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Well, the fastest way to watch that film is by following me, supporting me on Patreon. It'll cost you less than the cost of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe. The question you have to answer is, am I worth less than the price of a cup of tea? Patreon.com/George Galloway and every supporter there. And I'm deeply grateful to the more than 500 of them who, well, frankly, keep me going. If you can help them, keep me going, keep me firing on all cylinders, it would be a very big help to me. So thank you very much to those who are following me and to those who now might. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Watch my Killing Kelly film there. Some of my patrons have been on the line with comments. Ben says, I don't want to vote on the poll. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm hoping after Orban's recent interview with Tucker that a few others follow suit. Wishful thinking. Paul McDonald says, I guess mutual destruction is okay for the neocons in the White House. They have no reverse gear. Lord help us. As always, great question. Great show. Thanks, Paul. And Vivek Megalbjerg Anders says, you know, Gigi, I just can't believe the Russians would lose their head, but it is the neocon West going to try to provoke it. Most definitely, yes. John C. says, after watching Oppenheimer, no one in their right mind would start a nuclear war. But I'm afraid that Joe Biden, in my opinion, is not compos mentis. Let's pray common sense prevail. Thanks for a great show and truth. Thank you to all my patrons. Jason is on the line in California on nuclear war. Jason, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I think that it's more likely that there'll be a nuclear terrorist nuclear war. I think it's sort of a repeat of the 90s. I mean, if you remember back in the 90s, that after the 91 coup, it was found that the coup plotters actually got a hold of the nuclear codes from Gorbachev. And there were two important defectors from the 90s, too. There was Vasily Matroikin and there was Stanislav Lunev. Both of them claimed that basically nuclear weapons had been cached in the West, including the United States. Kurt Weldon, who was a representative of Congress, was actually investigating these weapons during the 90s. And I think that some of these weapons might have actually already been used. I mean, if you look at Vasily Matroikin, he defects, he goes into the Baltic Republic, I think it was like Estonia. Okay, I think that happened on April 9th. On April 10th, the Baltic Exchange was blown up there in London. And also there was another aborted attempt, I think it was sometime in November of 92. I think it was the Stoke-Newton Road. It was like a lorry bomb that was intercepted. So there were these bombings that curiously shadow the movements of Vasily Matroikin. And Vasily Matroikin had a document dump that revealed the identity of hundreds of Soviet intelligence agents. So it just makes sense to me that they did that. I also think that the World Trade Center bombing might have been a nuclear terrorist bombing, because I find it interesting, too, that in London, I think it was about April 24th, the Chechen Prime Minister Ruslan Utsev, so he was there in London. He gets assassinated. And then I think the day before he was assassinated, that's when the World Trade Center got blown up. So I think that if there is a war, it'll be something on that level. And I think that it'll just be covered up because nuclear weapons are so small now. If you go back and you take a deep dive on this,
not sure how you cover up,
and they're baseball sized.
A cigarette pack-sized nuclear weapon. A very dystopian tale all round. Jason in California. Thank you very much for the call, though. KR asks, George, please investigate Paul Biya, B-I-Y-A, of Cameroon, who is 90 years old and has been in power since 1982. He reshuffled his military commanders today because of the coup in Gabon. He might be next. Indeed, he might, and we'll be doing more on Africa in the weeks to come. As I told you on Wednesday, I am very hopeful that we can find someone to pony up the necessary for a MOATS Africa show, at least for a short period, while there's this tumult going on the continent. Thanks, KR. Lance is on the line in Canada about Russia. This is the Global University of the Airwaves. Lance, welcome to the show.
Okay. Well, George, you hit on something a couple of weeks ago when you were frustrated that the media spent so much time on, sex things and transitioning things and stuff like that. And even now, U.S. Congress is bringing back the whole Bud Light, let's call it a scandal, right? And I think you hit on something very important that I felt for a long time, is that this is 100% distraction, because in the background, you kind of have the elite carving out little places for themselves, like Lahaina in Hawaii and places in New Zealand. And I think they're, and militarizing the police forces in the regular places. And you've even had Ukraine sign a deal with Poland to work on a more favorable school curriculum for children to learn about a more favorable relationship between Poland and Ukraine. So, obviously, we're thinking of a constant, perpetual, long-term war. Some sort of financial thing's going to happen too, of course. and probably a pandemic in there somewhere. But, I mean, we either admit failure of our system or we keep putting money into war. I mean, those are the two things, and the people who pay for our system are not going to.
They are. That's the choice. I suppose my point earlier was, Lance, that in your country and in mine, whilst there are important voices who demur, there are millions, more than there have ever been in Britain before. I'm sure it's true also in Canada, who know that which in the past they did not know, for the reasons Neil Oliver was talking about earlier, about the expansion of the internet and the growth of social media platforms and so on. Ignorance being now a choice that people make of not to go and look for the alternative view to the mainstream poison that they have been fed for so long. All of that notwithstanding, our rulers would not be doing what they're doing if they thought they were not going to get away with it. And they do think that they are going to get away with it. I see no signs of uncertainty in your tyrant, Trudeau. I see no signs of uncertainty in the ruling elite in Britain, whether it's one cheek or the other cheek of the same ass that is actually in 10 Downing Street is almost entirely immaterial, because the same ordure will be emerging from the door of 10 Downing Street, whichever is in power. Lance, thanks for the call. YouTube comments. Concerned Patriot says, this is not a battle of left and right, but one of done less than good, hence the apparent fluctuation of membership. And Karlmao, that's Karlmao, US and NATO provoking Russia and China to pull the trigger first is a sign of the declining US empire. Indeed so, but even in decline, it has many times over the possibility of bringing about the end of humanity and all life, in fact, on this planet. Martin K. O'Connor says, I think they've got a term now, malinformation. The information may be factually true, but it seems to cause harm. They define harm. Just think about that. Malinformation. It may be true, but it may cause harm, and therefore we will suppress it. Thanks, Martin. By the way, 84 years ago, on this very Great Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. 84 years later, we're on the side of the Nazis, and so are the Germans. Mr. Chamberlain said this on BBC Radio 84 years ago today. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland. A state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received. That consequently, this country is at war with.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's take a call from my own country of Scotland. George in Dumbarton on 84th anniversary of declaring war on Germany. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, George, good evening. Yeah, I was saying to your researcher, I watched a film. It was made in 1964 with Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas and everyone else. And it was about, it was about a general who wanted to start a coup in the States. Something similar just now, but without the coup, because Joe Biden, he ain't running it. He couldn't run a bath. And I think the generals there are under the payroll of the guys who are really running the show, the IMF, the WEF, the United Nations, etc. And these guys are in imminent danger of seeing the financial system collapsing here. I mean, you've got nothing to lose, they'll lose it. And I think these guys are psychotic enough to take us to nuclear war rather than have everything exposed when the Russians eventually take over Ukraine.
Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Sorry for that rude interruption. I thought the Christmas term in internet jail had come early, just as I was talking about the danger of the interruption of normal service. There it came along. My apologies to George, my compatriot in Dumbarton, who was telling us an interesting story about a film from the early 1960s. George, you're still there, I think. Please complete what you wanted to say. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was a film that was about some mad generals trying to oust the president. And it was made in 1964. There are similarities between what's going on just now, because it's my contention that it's the generals and military people who are running the show, not Joe Biden. I mean, as I said, Joe couldn't run a bath, but he's there. He's a figurehead. The IMF and these people who really run the show and run West Europe, the EEC and everything else, these people are looking financial disaster in the face because the economic system is teetering on the brink. And I think that the challenges are happening from BRICS as well. And when these people have got nothing to lose, they will lose it. And I think they are psychotic enough to take us there, rather than Russia take over Ukraine and expose the corruption that has been going on.
Well, look, George, you may be right. I cut you short only because of the hour, and I'm grateful to your forbearance for the interruptions. I take a different point of view, and you may be right, and I may be wrong. But I kind of hope, and you maybe heard it in my question to Brian Berletic earlier, that actually the generals have got more sense than the politicians, rather than the generals pushing the politicians to do idiotic things. I may be wrong, it may be entirely wishful thinking on my part, but I'm kind of hoping that the top brass in the US military have got more sense than Joe Biden. Heaven knows it would be difficult to imagine it in any other way. But thanks, George. I suppose if we find out one way or the other, it might be the last thing that we ever find out. David Evans says on YouTube, profit over the common sense of a self-annihilation fuse about to meet the masses. And Richard Louis Townsend says, George is definitely going down the rabbit hole. Well, here's the number to call, Richard, unless you're a gutless coward that just wants to insult me over the internet. If you're in the UK or Ireland, you can call me right now free of charge. 08 081 965522. That's 08 081 965522. Or if you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Come on, Richard, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. A Brown Warrior says neoliberalism is destroying all that the workers fought for. Amen. Sarkar, a legend in Glasgow on Ukraine and Russia. Sarkar, go ahead, sir.
Hi there, George. Thank you so much once again for having me on your show. George, my question is with relation to Ukraine and Russia, and also a bit of a French pâtissier and pastries, I would say. Of late, the French have been trying to, be like that hero who'll be like saving Ukraine from Russia, trying to lead the European Union charge. Oh, wait, they're having a great time in Africa. They have aggrandized themselves by depredation of African resources. Now the Africans have realized that in the name of aid, they instill puppet governments. Look at the Bongo family from Gabon. They have been disposed. Look at Niger. They have been disposed. I'm really happy to see the way all these people who were lusting for Putin to be removed from their post are literally losing their grip all over the world. Because people are slowly starting to realize, George, that in the name of aid, these people have installed puppet governments, aggrandized themselves at the mercy of the others, at the depredation of the others. Now, the tables are turning, the Africans are rising, are realizing that all those Western help which was coming was actually kind of propaganda. Whether Russia and Prigozhin or Wagner did the coup anything in Niger or not, I don't care. But I'll tell you, George, what I like. The Africans have realized they got uranium and all other resources right beneath their feet. They don't need the French or anyone else's permission to trade that on their terms. They'll trade that on their own terms. George, do you think it's time for Africa to rise now?
Yes, and I think it's happening. Of course, it will be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Not everyone that replaces the tyrant that they overthrew will be necessarily that much better or even better at all. But the march, line of march is very clear. I'm sure as a regular listener, watcher, you'll know that what I said about Gabon just the other night on the show. This is a country of 2.5 million people with an ocean of oil underneath their soil. Every single one of them should be a multi-millionaire. They should be living like an Arab sheikh. In fact, Gabon was known, though not by me. I never heard about Gabon or Bongo, Ali Bongo or Omar Bongo. I never heard of them before because they were tyrants that the mainstream media had no interest in educating me about. But they called Gabon the Kuwait of Africa. Who knew? Well, the reason that we didn't know was that the wealth of Gabon was not shared amongst the 2.5 million people in the country. As a matter of fact, almost 40% of them were living below the poverty line when they all should have been multimillionaires. That profit was going to France. Bongo and Bongo, Biden and Biden, Macron and whoever went before him, whoever will come after him most likely, are all a part of the same criminal enterprise. And only a fool would believe that that could continue forever. Even the most weak worm will eventually turn. And the Africans are not worms. They are mighty lions, and they are shaking the dew from their mane, from their coats, and they are standing up and beginning to roar, and some of them are most impressive lions indeed. And the new kings that will emerge, hopefully kings with a small k, in these countries, seem, the Burkina Faso fellow, for example, is the best example, seem to be determined on a new Africa, with the Africa for the Africans, not for the colonialists who have raped and pillaged the continent for so very long. Sarkar, thank you for the opportunity to say that. I had Magnus on the line, but he has just disappeared. Let me sum up the poll. 21,209 people have voted, and around an average of 72% of you think that there will not be a nuclear war between the US and Russia in the coming year. I saw Oppenheimer, you see, and that's why I'm placing all other political questions to one side right now. I am re-energized on what I think is the most important, and that's a big understatement, I could argue the only important political matter in the world this day, is to stop the destruction of humankind, to stop World War III, which would be a nuclear war. Magnus is on the line in the West Midlands. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Magnus.
Hello, George. Great to talk to you. I'm basically going to say, like a variation of the point that started this, mate. I'm of an age when I'm old enough to remember when the Soviet Union was dissolved. And my impression very much so that there was a massive loss of heart in the left across the world, because that symbol of an alternative had been removed. Now, with the rise of Africa right now, or the anti-colonial sentiments on the march, very much so. Like, the population of Africa knew that they were getting shafted all the way through, but there was just nothing anyone could do about it. Obviously, they were tied up under the IMF, but you've got the bullying of America, of all of those countries, and there was nothing that they could do about it. So, with Russia standing up and standing so proud against the American hegemony, what this has done is it's just lit a fire to all of those, like in the playground. When you're getting bullied in the playground, there's nothing you can do about it. But if a new kid comes along and that bully now has got something to worry about, you can go, you know what, I've had enough of giving you my dinner money. I'm going to go and stand in that side of the park, at the park now, and I'm going to get, because I've got someone who's going to stand and fight with me. And I was just interested in your thoughts on that, George.
Well, that's a very beautiful call, Magnus. The call of the night, I think. The biggest change has been the emergence of China as the world's #1 manufacturer, and soon the world's #1 economy. The second biggest change is that Putin has picked Russia up off the floor where it was lying drunk, having its pocket picked under the drunkard Yeltsin, and has put Russia back on its feet, dusted it down, and made it strong and much healthier in every way. And that's, of course, why they hate Putin, if he was a drunken fool like Yeltsin, or just a fool like Gorbachev, they would have been fine doing business with him. But he's neither a drunkard nor a fool. And he has picked Russia up and restored its prestige to levels not seen since 1945. And that's very important. Suddenly you've got not one new guy arriving in the school who's going to challenge the bully, but two new guys that are ready to say to the bully, your days of bullying everyone are over. And you'll have to face not one of us using one against the other. You're going to have to face both of us at the very same time, because our relationship now, Russia and China, is beyond friendship. It's beyond allies. As both leaders have frequently said, they are one fist. And anyone who comes to weaken, dismember, destroy them will have to face both of them together. And they say that knowing that no one can face both of them together. The European Union would collapse overnight if China alone were to stop sending us the wherewithal that all of our economies completely depend on. You know that the European Union bought more Russian oil this year than last? You know that the European Union bought 230% more Russian fertilizer than they did last year? You know that the United States has imported 5 times more Russian uranium in the last year than they did the year before? None of these economies could survive the total and irreversible breach in relations with both China and Russia. Indeed, if China were to dump the United States debt, which it could very well do, and live to tell the tale, the United States of America and its currency, the dollar, would be no more. So it is, in a way, a race against time, Magnus. That's the cause of urgency, because maybe they want to blow everything up before they have lost their dominance, their domination, which, don't forget, they have enjoyed for, I don't know, 300 years maybe more. 300 to 400 years of domination of the European, and then the European and North American, and now the North American with the European as satraps empire. That's a very long time to be the top dog. That's a very long time to be the school bully. And now you have to confront these two new kids in the playground who won't let you steal everybody's dinner money anymore. And in fact, may very well extract from your pocket some recompense for all the crimes that you have committed before. Thanks for giving me the chance, Magnus, to get that off my chest. But I need to clear the decks because there's another legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Norma, welcome.
Hello, George. It's back to the UK now. I missed the beginning of your show. I'm sorry about that. But I wanted to actually point out something that's a bit of a worry, because I'm phoning because it might affect other elderly people. And my husband, he's still in hospital, he's still unwell. But when he comes home, and he's got very lack of mobility, and he needs an awful lot of care, it might get very complicated. Now, if there were good care or nursing homes, and you didn't have to worry about affording them, life would be so much less of a worry. I couldn't afford to pay the money that needs for my husband. I don't want him to go, but into a care or nursing home and stay in this house. And I think it's sad, really, that it's come to this. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. It's very sad indeed. Long ago, this so-called social care should have been a part of the National Health Service, which we were told and we paid for as being a service that would be available from the cradle to the grave. Well, by the grace of God, neither you nor your husband are in the grave, but you will certainly not be cared for in the twilight of your years unless you are prepared to financially ruin yourself. Now, the whole case for a national health and care service is not something I have the time left in the show to develop, though my party, the Workers' Party of Britain, is very strong on this. And as part of it, we demand the public ownership of the pharmaceutical industry, because how can you have a national health service that is held hostage by big pharma that can charge the National Health Service, a captive market, any amount of money that they like for the products which will be necessary as part of that National Health and Care Service. I hope it doesn't come to that, Norma. I hope that that your husband comes home and that the public sector and your own children can somehow find a way to keep both of you together at home. Last word to you, Norma.
Well, it's just that I'm getting very frail, George. I'm only 6.5 stone. And the thing is, I can't care for him because I can, but I can't do all the things. And if he can't walk, it's just diabolical. And he's got so much other things wrong with him, you'd be surprised. But I'm thinking, well, maybe he'll have to go somewhere nice. But I can't afford it because I can't stay in this house and afford £1,000 a week or something for a good nursing home. No. You know?
£1,000 a week. Norma in Bristol, you will have, I know, the heartfelt best wishes of every viewer of the mother of all talk shows. That's the end of the show. Indeed, it's almost 3 minutes beyond the end of the show. 21,328 people voted in the poll in the end. It's the end of this show, but not of the mother of all talk shows. As long as God gives me breath and as long as the internet police do not interrupt normal service, I'll be back again on Wednesday evening at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK time. So do spread the word so that the audience grows to such a size that it becomes a major and important factor in the making up of people's minds on the great issues of the day, here and there and everywhere. Good night.